We're here for part 2 of the race roundtable discussion, and we're joined by Byron, who's going to bring an interesting perspective to how we look at race. I'd like to start with something we touched on last time, but we really didn't, I didn't feel like we got enough contribution, so I thought it would be good for us to talk about and juxtapose these two words and concepts: privilege versus responsibility. And specifically, we've used words in our culture of majority privilege or white privilege versus personal responsibility.
So when I think about white privilege, I think that it's one of the privileges that exist. And it's the fact that people that are in the majority are the decision makers. People that look like you, that identify with a perspective that you have, are the ones that are making the decisions. But the thing about race, and the reason that people talk about white privilege so much, is because race tends to seep into almost all of the other privileges because of our country's history.
But Sabrina, can you enter into the skepticism that a white person would have around this issue of privilege when you do look at the inner city and you see the nuclear family exploded, which then looks more like a disintegration of personal responsibility and to being faithful in marriage, to taking responsibility for your kids, can you enter into that at all? Can you sympathize?
Over the course of history, in the last several hundred years, the black family has been targeted and intentionally separated by the powers that be, by slave owners, by government officials, by laws and policies. So there's a reason that there is a disintegration of the family, and absolutely there is personal responsibility. If I were talking to a black male that was deciding to leave his family, you better believe that the conversation would be 100% about his personal responsibility. But that is a separate conversation than the responsibility of the lawmakers and the decision makers in our country.
I feel as though that, the white people are the ones that destroyed the black family and the black home.
How is that that still true now?
Well, because those same Jim Crow laws still exist. There's damage, and you just can't say, well, you know what, I'm gonna jack you up for 200 years or whatever, and now, it's your fault, it's your problem to get yourself back together. How dare you?
To me, it just seems like dwelling on such things is not helping. I mean, there's no practical benefit to dwelling on something that happened even 50 years ago.
But it's happening, Tim, and that's the problem. You're saying it as if it's in the past, but it's happening. There are people today in America that are open about their discriminatory policies and beliefs. Do we not believe that those people are hiring, are teachers in schools,
Absolutely.
Are officials in a hospital?
Absolutely.
Are these people all just living in one city and they're not impacting black people at all anywhere?
I'll be honest, whenever we first watched the video from before, the words white privilege offended me. But I've spent some time in conversations with people, and it's changed my perspective somewhat, because I don't dismiss black history, but it's just not something that I ever spent a whole lot of time in.
If white America would take a step back and put themselves in black America's shoes, what would their outcome be also? Single family homes, teenage pregnancies, terrible schools,
drugs,
alcohol, abuse, all this stuff. But when you have money and when you have privilege, you never see yourself as the other guy. That's the problem.
Kason, I can tell you, as an individualist, I struggle to represent all of white America. The thing is, you can be a stump-toothed, mullet-wearing, 1979 Trans Am driving guy on meth and crack up your car or get shot by a sheriff's deputy out by Table Rock Lake, and the only difference is none of us really feel sorry for him. We say you shouldn't be doing those sort of things. And so it's not like we don't have those sort of experiences, but we don't look at them as a problem to be distributed to other people.
Because you are not experiencing what other people, like you just described, are experiencing. No one's associating you with a meth driver driving down the street. However, a professor working at Harvard can be accused of breaking into his home because when a man sees him, he's associated with his people.
Sure.
In a minority, by definition of a minority, you represent an entire group.
For what it's worth, that's one of the things I'm very sympathetic. There's only a handful of things about this issue as far as white versus black. This is one, like Kason, you said something last time. You said, I've got the weight of all of black America upon my shoulders.
I do.
My heart broke when you said that. And I kind of knew that in the abstract.
A white lady recently see me with my daughter and say, oh, she's such a beautiful girl. Is that by your girlfriend? But she automatically assumed that I wasn't a married black male, that I had a baby out of wedlock.
She asked you, is that by
She
your
said,
girlfriend?
is that your girl? So
here's
is
my
that
question.
Your girlfriend? Is that by your girlfriend? No.
If we say that privilege is real, and we say the next step is then like white people to be empathetic, are we saying that white people have to take a hit in privilege? For black people to have an increase in privilege?
I think
is there
people
like,
need
is
to
that
get
the
to
goal,
understand other people. Like if you have young black men hating the police. I got a ton of police officer friends and all that I love dearly. So when you get to know people personally, it changes what you think
This
about
is the
them.
answer.
So it's a
Relationships. He always talks about relationships. Darren
Yes.
does. People need to get in relationships
Absolutely.
to get to know other people. But if you never ever meet these people and you judge them from the outside, it's gonna be a flawed judgment.
You don't even have to get to know a police officer, but just think, wait a second. This guy wasn't necessarily being rude to me. He wasn't being mean to me. He was just doing his job. Was he nice to me? No. But, I was upset. This is routine, and that's where people miss the point with police officers. I recognize that was probably the worst part of your day.
But Brian, I'm an educated man, educated black man. So I understand that there's a reaction to the things that I do. But everybody don't think like that. That's what I'm saying. They need to get to know y'all, because then they may say, you know what, he is just doing his job.
Well, let's go back to one of your scenarios that you gave in the previous roundtable. Whenever you were talking about the police officers that came up to you with guns pointed, nobody likes to be talked to like that. Nobody wants a gun pointed at them. But
4 guns.
4 guns.
Well, Byron,
That's
sorry,
insane.
But if he was a white guy, would the scene have been played out the exact same way?
In that scenario, you're talking about, I believe you said it was an armed robbery, that they were looking for suspects, and we train police officers to do felony stops. In felony stops, we train them to have their guns drawn and approach that vehicle.
So if he was white,
absolutely,
it would have been the exact same thing.
Absolutely.
And see, in our world, we don't believe that.
Right.
Is there anybody asking the person who automatically assumes that a white cop pulled him over because he's black, has anybody said, man, you need to check your attitude?
Well, first of all, they're not in a position of power. We're talking about holding police officers accountable because they are put in position by their state, by their city, to serve and protect.
Right. Now,
The person that they pulled over.
This is a real serious bearing point. It seems to me that all the burden for these problems are being constantly shifted to the majority.
When you hear patterns of behavior, he just talked about patterns of behavior that police officers see in the youth or in the people that they work with, and they make their judgment sometimes based on those patterns of behavior. For people in the black community, there is a pattern of behavior of not being served and protected by police officers, but being targeted as criminal.
Absolutely.
Targeted as criminal repeatedly. These youth that are in these neighborhoods have never experienced police officers protecting them. They have experienced them being locked up, pushed up against the car, put on the ground, sometimes with reason, sometimes without reason.
Absolutely.
That is their view of officers. They have not experienced them protecting them.
Nowhere is a law enforcement officer authorized to use a firearm unless deadly force is warranted. Okay, so I understand. I get the shoot to kill comment.
Deadly.
If I am
That's a gray
justified,
area.
if
Well,
I'm
Michael Brown didn't
justified,
have a gun. So how is he? So how was
but
he deadly?
there were guns involved in that. Every time I go to a call, there's
Did he
guns
have
involved.
But in the Michael Brown case, there was no gun. So how's there deadly?
Yes, there
force?
was. There was at least one. The police officer had one, and that's what they were fighting over, from what I understand. But my point is, if I go to a call, if you go to Officer Down Memorial page, you can look. Just in the last few months, there's been, I think, 3 police officers that were killed with their own weapons because they responded to a call. The suspect didn't have a gun. They ended up taking the police officer's gun and killing them with their own weapon. So the idea of he was unarmed, and I'm not talking about Michael Brown, I'm talking about any suspect. When you say unarmed, there's always a gun involved when there's a police officer present. Every time, at least one, and probably more. Now, back to the shoot to kill. I know it's unpleasant, it's hard to swallow, but we train police officers to shoot center mass and to shoot until the threat stops. But whenever your adrenaline's pumping and you're fighting for your life, it's not color.
It makes you choose
It's not
bad
color.
decisions or the wrong decisions.
Well, that's your perspective, because my goal, whenever I go to a call, if somebody's fighting me over a gun, one time in my career, I actually was fighting, actually 2 times, fighting over a gun, okay? Fighting over a gun. I was very fortunate that I did not have to use deadly force. If it would have come to that, does that mean that that was a bad decision for me to use it? I was justified in using it. Fortunately, by the grace of God, I didn't have to use it, but I was justified in using it. So I went home to my family. My 3 kids got to see their dad that night. If I fail to use the proper amount of force, then my kids don't get to see their dad that night. Now, the flip side to that is, in this Michael Brown case, Michael Brown didn't get to go home to his family.
That's right.
But, you know, we can't sit and Monday morning quarterback a police officer's decision whenever we weren't there. We weren't the ones that were getting pummeled in our car. We weren't the ones that were fighting over the gun.
So does that mean that police life is more valuable than non-police life?
That means that the police officer's #1 priority is to survive.
So it's a yes.
So you
No, hold on.
You keep saying she's making up excuses for every time somebody's stopped by the police. He making up excuses why police can do what they want to. So in a roundabout way.
It's just the way that you're looking at them. You see them as there to serve and protect, where the black community see them as oppressors, not caregivers, as oppressors. And how do you respond to oppressors? Have you ever seen the Hunger Games? People rise up against oppressors. They can't eat. That's why they call them pigs. And I'm not saying that that's okay. Okay, I have family members that are police officers, but I'm saying that is the view. You have to understand that that's the lens that they're being looked at.
How do we unscrew this? Because the fact is,
Good question.
the good Lord has said to us through the great apostle, he said, there is no government in existence that is not there by divine authority. And he is to be, and he bears a sword for a good reason. He's to be a fearful thing to those who do evil. Now, I understand the narrative of cop as oppressor. And I'm not saying that that did not happen, that there isn't some context, and that it didn't happen in a vacuum. But the fact of the matter is that lawlessness is an oppressive thing as well. And the people who are living in these neighborhoods are oppressed by lawlessness that have nothing to do with a man in a badge.
We're not justifying lawless behavior and saying that because they are feeling or are oppressed by white officers that justifies criminal behavior. That is not being said here. We're saying, can we just acknowledge point A first? That there is an oppressive relationship between inner city black youth and police officers that has permeated to other parts of the black community, and that there is not an amicable and friendly relationship, and that because of that, there will continue to be incidences like what we've seen in the news. We're saying, can we deal with that fact? Can we change the policy? Can we hold people accountable?
What, if any, positives can we take from Ferguson?
I think the Ferguson forced this conversation on us. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Ferguson, and I think this interaction is needed for me and my understanding of the dynamics and racism and prejudice and all of it. I think this is needed, and this is a positive.
So to me, all of this here have brought exposure. This thing stinks. It smells.
So you see Ferguson as a culmination of a pot that's been simmering, and now it's just like exploded. And now it exposes generations of issues that have come to the surface, and it's been exposed.
And it's like now we have no choice but to deal with this here, because we can no longer just go back to norm if norm really was norm, okay? But it's like we have to deal with this broken community that's here in St. Louis. And how do we do that?
There's a quote that Dr. Martin Luther King said. He said, "The greatness of America is the right to protest for rights." How do you think the protesting in the aftermath of Ferguson shows us what it means to be Americans, and how do you interact with just how things have gone to this point?
I get the protesting, but even when the Rams, those guys came out and did their protesting, white America was so mad at these young men, like to say, you don't have a right to protest.
For me, as a police officer, seeing a group of athletes that are on the football field siding with the idea that this police officer murdered this man, feloniously, murdered him, that was hard for me to swallow.
There is nothing about these protests that I think is remotely reflective of the love of Christ. When a group of people get together and are demanding a certain outcome of a judicial proceeding without regard to the evidence, I'm not looking at a group of people righteously asking for judgment. What I saw was a group of people who gathered together to say, this is what I'm expecting out of a judicial proceeding, before evidence had been evaluated. And that is not a ask for justice, that is a lynch mob.
Well, what about Dr. King?
Oh boy.
I mean, they was nonviolent, they beat him.
You are equal to me under the law. I'm not saying that culturally there are not a lot of things that need to be dealt with, but
it's not the law, it's who's interpreting the law.
Yeah, the fact is, a lot of what has been portrayed in the media is not actually the only thing that has happened. There are peaceful protests happening all over this city where people in silence and in quietness are gathering, laying down to demonstrate, just like people sat at lunch counters to protest the fact that they were not allowed in those places. When they were sitting at those lunch counters, Jim Crow legislation was in place, they were breaking the law. Our policies need to change to reflect the fact that this country is for all people.
What is inbounds protesting and what is out of bounds protesting?
I think anger is okay.
Absolutely.
Non-violent, righteous anger is okay and understandable.
Yes.
But violence is not okay.
And protesting is not rioting. We're not arguing about rioting. Everyone at this table agrees that rioting, lawlessness, breaking, burning down buildings, especially in your own community, is not the way to get people to listen.
Something that occurred to me is that the spirit, okay, again, this is my perspective, and I am prepared to be argued out of this. When I saw no justice, no peace, justice for Michael Brown, what I'm hearing is, I don't care what the evidence is, I want Darren Wilson on trial. That is not justice. That is demanding for an outcome.
It's the motive. Is it revenge? Or is it justice?
Yeah.
I think it's the motive and a heart issue.
But what I am not seeing is a spirit of justice. I'm seeing a spirit of vengeance. Now,
but this is not the church that you're looking at. As believers, we need to recognize when we are not looking at believers, okay? When we are not looking at people that are following and believe the same gospel that we do. And for people that feel like the world is unjust for them and feel like the world is against them, then no justice, no peace makes sense. So does it make sense to expect for them to protest in a gospel-centered way? No, not really. As the church, however, we can have righteous anger about injustice. We should have righteous anger about injustice. We should be willing to allow the lens of the gospel and the scripture to take a look at our hearts, take a look at our policies, take a look at our lawmakers and our law enforcers and say, man, where is sin permeating and affecting us in a way that is dividing us? We are made of flesh and have a propensity towards sin. So should it be shocking to us that a person's prejudices could impact their behavior? The Bible says that it does. So we should be acknowledging that, but we should also be fighting for justice.
I think
biblical justice.
Another way to protest is to point to a better way. So it's not like what we do